Hey Thomas. Soham, I'm gonna have to bring you up to speak. You should see an invite now. Can you test
Yep,
your audio?
got it.
Okay,
Can you
awesome.
guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Awesome.
Let's give a few more minutes for people to load in. We're still waiting for Nevin too, and then we can get started. I'm
Perfect.
testing it out today. We've installed this bot on the channel that allows us to record the session through that bot. So it's the first time we're testing it out. We'll see if it works.
Our progression as Discord experts.
It's strange that Discord doesn't allow you to natively record meetings or like stages.
They outsource feature development to the community.
Yeah. Hey, Nevin, I'm going to invite you to speak, and then if you accept that one, there you go. Oh, test your audio again, Nevin.
Testing.
Yeah, it works. It works. All right. People are
And
still
after
loading in. What's that, Thomas?
I say, Nevin, you might have to swap headphones.
All right, will do.
All right. I think we can start. People are loading in, but let me actually trigger the recording button, and then we can go ahead and get started. 1 second. Here we go. All right. Thanks everyone for being here. In today's session, we're gonna discuss the future of the Reserve protocol after the launch on Ethereum mainnet. Since we're getting pretty close, we wanted to take a moment and share our ideas with the broader community for what the plans are after launch. And so that's why we've brought on, we have Thomas, who's our head of platform. We have Soham, who is responsible for business development on the RToken side, and we have Nevin, who's CEO of Reserve. I wanted to start, since we haven't really introduced Soham officially to the community since he recently joined, I wanted to kind of start with an intro. So Soham, could you please tell us how you got to Reserve and introduce you to the community, and tell us what you will be focusing on here at Reserve?
Yeah, absolutely. Sinatra, thanks so much for the intro there. Hello to all the community members. I'm super excited to be joining the Reserve team. Just an absolutely awesome project, and honor to work with everyone here. In terms of my background, so I started kind of in traditional finance. I was on Wall Street as in sales and trading, which I did for a couple of years. Really didn't I learned a lot there, but really didn't think that was kind of my future, right? I always wanted to go kind of more into the tech industry and things like that. And so I found myself actually, after a little bit, moving over to the fintech side. I spent a few years in fintech, mostly focused on growth strategy and partnerships. And, during that time, over the last few years, I've also gotten very much into crypto and DeFi specifically. And so when I was introduced to Thomas and Nevin here at Reserve, it was almost, for me, it was like my dream job, So I ended up joining here about a month ago, and I'll be focused predominantly on the business development and partnerships side of the RToken team, as Sinatra mentioned. So extremely excited to get started. Very excited to, get to know you guys as a community. And so far, you guys have been nothing but fantastic. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Sam. And we're definitely going to dive into some more details of what your role is going to be at, because that's actually the main topic of today. Welcome to the team. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you very much.
to all those details in a few. So the plan is we're going to dive into these details of our plans for RToken growth after launch. Before we go there, I kind of want to set the stage with some setting up questions, and I want to start with a question for Thomas. Kind of taking a look at the future, Thomas. If you look into, let's say, so right now, the way that I think about this is right now we're kind of at the start of a new adventure because the product we've been building so far, we're ready to launch a protocol, or almost ready to launch a protocol, and from then on, it's a new journey almost, where we focus more on the growth of our tokens. I kind of want to know your vision or your thoughts, Thomas, about what the future is going to look like from now on, and I kind of want to focus on the near future. So, Thomas, let's say. Let's take a look at the next year for the platform. What would you consider a successful first year for the Reserve protocol?
Yeah, good one. So I think number one, a successful and safe launch. It's the biggest thing that we're focused on right now, and I think as we've mentioned in a variety of different spots. At this point, we're really focused on testing and working with our various auditors to make sure that all our T's are crossed and I's are dotted. We actually just got back a audit report this morning from someone from one of the firms that we're working with. That was very encouraging, which is great. And continuing to push on that. I think like post launch. At the end of the day. We're really excited to see what people launch, what people deploy, what types of stablecoins that have a variety of different yield and risk levels, and different creative ways of distributing the revenue to the insurance holders and the RToken holders and folks. So I think a successful couple months from now is we've got a variety of great RTokens that are live. On the platform, and that different folks are using for different things. And then, it's always hard to set goals. But some numbers that we're floating around in terms of like what we're trying to hit is, we want to grow our TVL. That at the end of the day will be the way that we measure the growth of the platform. And so, we're setting targets for 6 months from now and a year from now. And hopefully those continue to ramp up.
So would you say, Soham, that also from the perspective of the RSR holders, would you say that the main metric they should look at regarding RTokens is what you call TVL or more or market cap of RTokens? Is that the most important metric that defines success for the protocol?
That's a good question. I don't think it's the most important metric because the nuance there is that we want to ensure that there are safe. At the end of the day, our mission is to have a stable reserve currency that is. We don't really care what it's backed by as long as it's backed by things that allow people to save and fight inflation safely. And so, like at the end of the day, that is the number one goal. But in terms of measuring the growth, I think that TVL is the number that we'll be tracking frequently.
Makes sense. Thank you. Nevin, I wanted to kind of ask if you have any extra comments here, because I can imagine, I know how you think about governance and how most of the rest of the team thinks about governance. So I might expect you to say, obviously, market cap for RTokens is very important and maybe the most important thing. But I can imagine you also wanting to see evolvements in governance systems in the coming year. Any thoughts on that, Nevin?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I totally agree with Thomas that the main North Star metric is just going to be TVL in the short term, and I think that's important, for the economics of the project overall, and also just for the momentum of the project overall. Like it's something that could bring like a lot more. It's not just that it would be like financially exciting for us or for other RSR holders, although it would be, but it also could bring in a lot of like further resources to the project, further talent and attention and connections and so on, to to end up being one of the high TVL projects. So that's another reason why I think it is very important for the long-term trajectory. But you're right, Jens, that I do think governance and progress in governance is important as well, and that's kind of important with this very long time frame in mind. And so, as I think most people know, we've started to collaborate with an external firm on governance research. They're named Bismarck Analysis, and that firm is really interesting because it's run by some friends of mine, and they have this approach of they're basically a consulting firm. They often work for like wealthy people to help them understand some very nuanced political situation or some particular person that they're doing business with. But these people are extremely intent on understanding governance, and they've studied the entire history of governance throughout like the entire human civilizational period. And so it's been really cool to start to work with them and to start to see some proposals for like how we could shift around the way that governance works and come up with like kind of an additional system that RToken deployers could choose to use. So that's a long-winded way of saying yes. What I'm hoping is that within the first year after launch, that research effort ends up yielding sort of at least one new governance framework that's an alternative that we sort of open source and offer to anyone to use. Maybe 2 versions, who knows? But should expect to see in coming months like more and more discussion of the system ideas that are being generated by that research effort. And then, we're also, like, for example, at DevCon, excited to talk to a bunch of others in the governance space and see what ideas others are having and do that collaboratively, because a lot of these systems can be applied to, many different protocols and so there's a lot of cross-pollination possible there.
Awesome, interesting. I'm very excited to see what will appear governance wise. Jack, I actually brought you on the stage. If you want to ask your question, I'll invite you to speak once more, just in case you wanted to ask your question, because it was a really interesting one. It was related to the next topic that I wanted to discuss. I'll ask your question, Jack. I see you didn't accept the invite. It's related to, and Nevin, I wanted to ask you this question, or ask you first, and then if others have comments to add. Before we dive into the details of our plans for RToken growth, I kind of wanted to set the stage with a question that we often get in the community, which is related to the market fit of RTokens. A question or a remark that I often get is there's already quite a lot of stablecoins out there. If you want centralized stablecoins, you can use USDC or USDT or some others. And then if people want more decentralized version, they can use DAI or RAI. You can argue about their decentralization, but let's assume that there are already quite a few stablecoins out there on the market. Nevin, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what do you think differentiates RTokens, because that's like, and Thomas has said this a few times in recent events. He said like the main catalyst that will make RToken TVL grow is the product market fit. So could you speak a bit on that, Nevin, and maybe Thomas, you can add on that later. What differentiates RTokens from other stablecoins?
Well, I guess I have a long-term answer and a short-term answer. Let me give them both. So when I think about product market fit, or sort of the risk of not having it, I think that there can be, with any new product, you can have technology risk or you can have market risk, or both. What that means is if you just have technology risk and not market risk, that means that you have a product where you're pretty damn sure that people want that product, and then the question is technological, like can you actually produce the product? Can you actually produce it at scale? Where you're pretty sure that if you did, then it would be fantastically popular, right? And so like often these are, well, anyway, so there's that. Then there's the market risk situation where it's like, okay, we know we can make this thing, but we haven't really, like, people haven't encountered a thing like this before, so we just don't really know, are people going to want this? Are they going to want this in a large volume? The way I see it, stable currency as a general tool in the world obviously sort of has product market fit. Like, stable currency is very valuable. People want their currency to be stable. That's pretty straightforward. And so then in the long term, the way I think about the reserve protocol and the idea of creating stable non-fiat currency is that, in the situation where fiat currencies continue to have challenges, the way that they seem to inevitably have, there's a technological risk of, like, well, can we produce, or can the reserve protocol and ensuing ecosystem produce stable currencies that outlast fiat currencies that don't have those issues? And if so, I personally am pretty confident that the world will want that. And so it's a technological risk challenge in my book, where it's like the question of, I often reduce it to, can we get governance right, and will enough assets be tokenized? But there's maybe a further question there. Maybe a super diversified portfolio of assets with one-to-one redeemability doesn't quite work. Maybe you need a little bit more nuance on top of that in order to smooth out volatility in that portfolio, for example, and that could be a further technological advancement. So I see technological risk for that long-term goal of creating stable non-fiat currencies. Now, let's talk about the short term. Like, immediately after launch, obviously, we're not yet in a position with what's tokenized to start exploring, totally dollar-independent currencies. A lot of the tokens that exist in DeFi are dollar-denominated, and so it's really more like, well, what can be built on top of this tech stack in the short term, even though we're still waiting for further evolution in the ecosystem. And so, in that sense, and I think this strikes more at the heart of your question, Jens. It's like, well, there's a lot of stablecoins out there. Why would this be more interesting to any given user population? So I do think that the universe of basically wrapped DeFi baskets, where you can explore sort of anything that exists in DeFi and wrap it together in a basket, and then offer insurance and active governance on top of it, I personally think that's pretty interesting. But like, we don't know how people will respond to that. We don't know exactly what people will build with that, and we don't know how the market will respond to that. One thing that I think a lot of people miss that excites me and makes me think that this product could be really killer is that if the governance is done properly, if it is sufficiently decentralized, then you could have a wrapped basket token that is not a security from the US legal perspective. And that's actually pretty important because there are many interesting yield-bearing assets in DeFi, and there are assets that are backed by baskets in DeFi already. But if you look closely at them, in my opinion, many of them are securities from a US legal perspective. And that makes it so that, a Coinbase or a Binance or other reputable exchanges, centralized exchanges, or wallets, modern fintech companies that have started to list crypto assets like Venmo or Cash App, etc., they're not going to list those because they're securities. And so there's possibly this sweet spot where you could have asset-backed stablecoins, basket-backed stablecoins that are yield-bearing, that do have like an active management component, but where that management is sufficiently decentralized that it's that the resulting token is not a security, and thus it could end up being listed much more broadly and accessible to many more people. Now, will that happen? I don't know, right? I'm not in control of all of those exchanges and wallets and so on. But that was one of the ideas that we sort of embedded in our design process, was to aim for a governance system that would be clearly sufficiently decentralized so that we'd be outside of that securities designation. And that's one thing that that I'm excited about, and we'll see if that ends up working, to get a sort of shorter term product market fit for yield bearing stablecoins.
I think the other key thing, to touch on the last part of the original question in terms of product market fit and launch partners. One of the things that we've been hearing quite a bit, Nevin touched on this, is the insurance, right? Like at the end of the day, there are a lot of stablecoins. There's been a lot of craziness in the stablecoin world, specifically over the last couple months. And I think that one thing that is we've gotten a lot of really good feedback on is that people are excited about this insurance. That is like a decentralized insurance that no matter where the token is held, whether that token's held on a hardware wallet, in a MetaMask, with a third-party custodian in an app, whatever that is, that insurance kicks in and handles it all behind the scenes on chain. And that's something that's really interesting to folks. And no other stablecoins out there that I'm aware of. If anyone knows of one, please tell me. I'd love to learn more about it. No one else has that feature yet. And so yeah, that is one thing in particular that we've got a lot of great feedback on.
It's
to
a thing that
piggyback off that as well. Sorry to interrupt. To piggyback off that,
go ahead.
The way I like to think about it in terms of the main differentiating factors, it comes down to risk mitigation, right? No one wants their stable coin, whatever stable coin they hold, to just have the risk of potentially depegging and losing basically all your savings and whatnot, similar to a Terra Luna type situation, right? The whole issue there was that people were promised that this was a savings account, and then it ended up just getting completely drained, right? So to piggyback off Thomas's point on the insurance piece, right? That's one mechanism of risk mitigation for stablecoins. The other part of it is the diversification, right? The fact that you can create a stablecoin with not just one asset, maybe a centralized asset or something like that, but a diverse set of tokenized assets as well. So both of those things kind of work hand in hand in terms of the core differentiating factors of what makes RTokens unique in this heavily saturated world of stablecoins, I would say.
Totally. The fact that all ERC20 tokens can be tokenized is, to me personally, is the most cool thing. Just because I would bet money on it that in the near future we're going to see assets tokenized that we didn't even think of yet, that will create use cases for our tokens that we probably didn't think of yet either. So yeah, that's definitely a cool part. And then what I wanted to add on the insurance part is it's one of the things that people have been most excited about, to me personally, as a community manager, just because, as you said, Soham, these issues that have been happening, so many hacks that we've seen, and then the depegs of a few stablecoins. So having that insurance layer that you can check at all times on chain to know that it's safe, I think that's a big part. And it's to be honest, I'm gonna put some of my stables in RTokens just because of that fact. I think it's very clear those are the main differentiators between other stablecoins and RTokens. Okay, I wanna start diving into some details of our plans for our token growth. Soham, I believe you have, together with the rest of the team, you've set up these plans. You were one of the main people that have worked on this. If I recall correctly, the way you describe our plans for our token growth is in 3 main pillars. Could you talk a bit about the pillars and maybe give us an introduction or a detailed description about the first of the 3 pillars?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way we kind of thought about it in terms of the pillars, we really wanted to focus on how does technological adoption, particularly in the world of finance and currencies, usually happen, and kind of map our growth trajectory to what we've seen kind of work in the past in this field, right? And it really kind of comes down to almost three areas, I would say. One is kind of the innovation aspect. The second is kind of the early adopters, right? You see with any new technology, you have your early adopters who are really kind of working the kinks out and figuring out where the fit is. And then lastly is just kind of mass adoption, right? And what you can think of as almost like retail adoption. And this is where you go from something that you kind of look at the hockey stick curve, right? That a lot of people talk about in venture capital and in finance and in different industries. And this is really where you get that kind of hockey stick type curve. So kind of going back to that first point of innovation, right? So our first pillar is going to be focused on RToken creation. right? And so the goal here is really to, one, raise awareness for Reserve as a protocol and what our vision is in terms of helping people achieve stable currency and fight inflation. And two is to really target potential RToken deployers that we think will make great fits in terms of folks that are willing to kind of have that financial engineering, entrepreneurial, developer perspective and really deploy RTokens, because we're going to be putting out this platform that we're really excited about. But if no one ends up actually creating RTokens, then kind of what's the point, right? In terms of how we're going to get there, right? We have a very detailed kind of marketing and PR strategy that we're laying out right now in kind of the months leading up to our launch. So very excited to be rolling that out on the social media side and things of that nature on the marketing front. Second is going to be really reaching out directly and connecting with people within the DeFi community, developers, financial engineers, people really that we think could make really interesting RToken deployers, and starting to have conversations with them, making them aware of our protocol, and kind of pitching them on the benefit that they could achieve just by deploying a very successful RToken that gains a lot of adoption. And then the last kind of piece of this is kind of conferences and events. So we're going to be attending a lot of conferences this fall, also trying to make connections with developers as well as other people in the DeFi community, really try to get our name out there and get people to basically be interested once the platform launches to deploy RTokens. So that's kind of a three-pronged approach we're taking in this first RToken creation phase. Hopefully that gives folks a little bit of context on what we're going for there.
It does, because we've made publicly the decision that Reserve is creating the platform, not the RTokens themselves. So it only makes sense for Reserve to do the work, market the thing, to make sure that deployers do create RTokens. Question about that for Thomas and Nevin. Let's start with Nevin. Nevin, who do you think are the ideal candidates for creating RTokens? And as a second question, has Reserve already talked with potential RToken creators?
Yeah, so in the short term, I think basically there's a category of people who are deep in DeFi, who are most prepared to see the possibilities, right? If you're very deep in DeFi, if you've done some amount of financial engineering within DeFi or capital allocation, or even if you're just like a really hardcore yield farmer on your own, then you're familiar with the sort of long tail of different assets that exist. And you've probably had the experience of your friends or family being like, whoa, like, what is that? How could I participate in that? And maybe you try to explain it to them and you're like, okay, yeah, actually it doesn't really make sense for you to do all this crazy stuff I'm doing. If you're someone in that position, then you can sort of see that with a Reserve protocol, you could take what the very complicated things that you're doing to construct those positions and package that into something that is accessible to a normal human. And so we have had some conversations with folks in the DeFi world that match that description. Maybe Thomas would want to comment on that in more detail because he's been sort of more engaged on that side, or maybe Soham as well. But so I think that basically, DeFi nerds are sort of the logical population of people to start with this. I do think in the longer term, there's maybe more of an ideological component. Like I personally foresee a community continuing to form and consolidate around the idea of creating non-fiat money. And we see some of that with Bitcoin and crypto overall, but there's a lot of bullshit. There's like a lot of people sort of talking about the fall of the dollar, but they just want the price of their Bitcoin to go up, and they're kind of just trying to shill. But there are, we've talked to, many people reach out to us because they see our project's mission and they're excited by it. There are a contingent of people out there who, from an ideological perspective, would like to see the thing that we're ultimately driving towards happen in the world. And so I think that over the course of time, the profile of people making RTokens could change sort of slowly to a contingent that's more ideologically focused, who maybe aren't necessarily doing it for the money, but doing it more for what it could cause in the world.
I think that's exactly. And the biggest group I'll add is an interesting in-between group that is, I think, they're basically seeing the Starbucks model and want to mimic it for their own business or ecosystem or whatever it is. And for those that aren't aware, Starbucks has like over $1 billion in gift cards that are stored on their platform, and they're able to make revenue from all of the capital that is held up there. And it's an interesting, it's kind of an interesting metaphor or similarity here. I think I'm using the wrong comparison term there, but there's other businesses that also see this platform as an opportunity to create a branded currency for their ecosystem, where they'll be able to participate in the upside. And we've had we've had a bunch of conversations with folks that are interested in something like that. And that group is like very broad. It might be someone with a crypto app. It might be someone like I mentioned last time. I spoke to a bank who's interested in it. There's a variety of different folks that are interested in this kind of thing. It could be crypto games that don't want to watch their game currency trend towards zero like most of them do, and want to just focus on the assets and the other parts of the game as opposed to that more complex part of the game economy that they make up. So it's another interesting segment. The two that Nevin mentioned are definitely the beginning and the end groups, I would say.
As a side question, Thomas, for you, the way that I think about RToken deployers is I can see some, Nevin called them these DeFi nerds or whatever term he used, that want to experiment with the platform. I'm sure those will be there. But if you compare those with potential, let's call them institutional RToken deployers, these individuals will have less capital or resources to effectively market or grow their RToken themselves versus an institution or a company that can actually put more and more resources on marketing an RToken. Do you have an idea or a vision about what percentage of RToken deployers is going to be individuals versus entity, let's call them companies? And is there something that Reserve does for these individuals? Like imagine an individual deploying an RToken, but them having no capital whatsoever to do any kind of marketing. Is there something Reserve does to help them boost, or anyone else does to help them boost, or any thoughts on that?
Yes. So before we even get to the boosting part, it's kind of an interesting, like, philosophical question of what do people trust more, right? Like those. Nevin was joking about Bitcoin, but there's like a beauty to Bitcoin in that no one knows who Satoshi is, right? And that it like is almost purely like a community grown thing. And I could see a world where someone anonymously deploys an RToken and does it in a very decentralized, permissionless way, and that in and of itself is valuable to the community. And especially in the DeFi world, we've seen that play out before. And so I could see a world where I could talk myself into thinking that is like the one that will end up getting being the most successful. But at the same time, to your point, like marketing matters, and institutions can throw marketing dollars behind it, and also like funnel in existing use cases to make it easy for people to obtain and use these things. And so I think with the right teams that are launching them, that those could be very successful as well. To the last part of the question around how we can help. We've mentioned this a few times. We're trying to figure out what the best way to have our grant program is, but our goal is we've got a variety of resources internally that we're aiming to help people that use our platform use to grow. And so whether that's like expertise or voting power in the Curve ecosystem, or a variety of different things. We're aiming to help assist folks that use our platform. And so, yeah, I think I got most of it.
That does answer the question. And James just asked the same thing in the general chat. He's asking, will there be any resources available for potential RToken deployers? So I think the answer there is, James, yes, the Reserve will have a grant program, which we still have to officially announce, but we've been mentioning it here and there already a few times. But so yeah, and that could be a lot of things. That could be, we're using a system where we allow free applications, and also we have a list of proposals that we think might be good to fund. More on that later, but the short story is yes, we're here to support RToken deployers, to help them make them big. Those RTokens make them big, but the RTokens have to make sense, of course. If you're gonna make a Ponzi RToken, I'm not sure if that's even possible, but there will be some kind of vetting process.
Sinatra, one thing that I forgot to say is on the DeFi nerds group, I consider myself one of those. And I know that there's actually a couple on this call who I've been having some amazing conversations with in the RToken brainstorm channel. And so, yeah, that is a group that we're very excited to collaborate with.
Yeah. Also, for people that are in here that haven't visited that channel yet, you can find the RToken brainstorm channel. If you have ideas about RTokens, discuss them with us and with the rest of the community there, and then that can be a joint effort. All right.
One thing I want to just quickly interject with here is I think one thing that is obviously super important when creating something that's meant to be used by a large population, if it's not just like a hobbyist project, is the branding. And so by that I mean the name that's picked for any given RToken and the visual representation of that RToken. And the thing is, I can easily imagine someone being like an intelligent financial engineer who comes up with a great idea and makes it happen. Maybe they're also a programmer, or they get a programmer to help implement a collateral contract or whatever. But then, maybe they're not very good at branding. And so this is something that I think we need to facilitate within the community, people who are good at branding, and maybe us supplying some resources to help with that, to connect with those who are deploying things, so that things, it's like you sort of name something once and you choose the initial graphical representation once. Maybe you pivot after a while, but it's best if you get it right at the beginning. And so I think assistance with naming and graphic design from us, or just from people in the community, is going to be actually a pretty important piece, and something that I definitely have on my mind.
Yeah, great point. Ryan says in general chat he's gonna call his RToken Bitcoin. Not sure if that works for the market. All right, let's get into the next pillar, BD wise. Soham, so the first pillar is targeting RToken creators, RToken deployers. Can you talk us through the second big pillar of RToken BD plans, Soham?
Absolutely. So it's good that we touched on kind of that first aspect, which is really focused on innovation, getting good RTokens deployed, and things of that nature. Now we kind of move on to the second kind of pillar that we were discussing, which really is focused on early adopters and getting adoption for RTokens, right? And we really see this as kind of a DeFi expansion kind of phase, right? For everyone who's focused on and familiar with kind of the crypto and DeFi world, this is really where a lot of things you guys are familiar with are going to start to resonate, right? The goal here is to really partner with other projects in the DeFi space to increase utility for RTokens themselves once they've been created, right? So anything from DEX listings and liquidity incentives on, let's say, different decentralized exchanges or Curve or something like that for our RTokens, to getting listed on different borrowing and lending protocols, Compound, Aave, you name it. We're going to be going after those types of partnerships. Also, just simple things like portfolio tracking integrations on like DBank and things like that, as well as educational content and partnerships. You can think of pretty much anything that a DeFi user would use, we are going to try to partner with those sorts of organizations to help increase the utility for our tokens. Data analytics types integrations like Coin Market Cap, CoinGecko, those are all things we're going to be kind of going after, as well as kind of research partnerships as well. To be able to kind of partner with like a Mazzari or something like that would be really awesome. To have them do kind of research pieces on us, investment grade or institutional grade research on Reserve Protocol and RTokens would be phenomenal. So that's kind of our phase 2 almost in terms of our DeFi expansion plan. Hopefully that gives folks an idea of where we're going on that front once we actually have some successful RTokens deployed.
Yeah, for me personally, it's very clear. If anyone has questions about that, feel free to put them in the general chat. One big thing that you mentioned. Oh, Thomas, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think so. Now that another way to think about this is, our tokens, the goal is for them to be a currency. And currencies are as useful as the things that you can do with it, right? And so we're aiming to partner with other DeFi protocols to essentially like add features to the currency, right? And every new feature will make it more useful for someone else, right? And so, whether that's being able to trade with it or being able to supply it as collateral or borrow it or whatever the things are, think of all the money verbs, right? And then DeFi comes up with some crazy ones like leveraged yield farming and stuff like that, right? But at the end of the day, like all of these DeFi partnerships are really like features, things that you can do with the currency. And so we'll be working with. We've already started conversations with different platforms. We'll be prioritizing these in terms of how helpful we think they'll be to people and how much we think they'll contribute to growth of the TVL.
I have a question about that. For these other like protocols to integrate tokens, do you guys know how much it's like kind of in fact governed by a small handful of people, and you like reach out and have personal conversations with them versus a bunch of token holders kind of have to be persuaded as a crowd to like democratically vote to add your thing? Like in practice, which of those two do you think is like the dominant thing that we're going to have to pursue?
I think it's going to range from one-on-one conversations to seed it with key community members or team members of different things. Some of these actually have BD teams can start the conversation with. And then others, like Aave, for instance, is like, put a proposal up, try to get people to vote for it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to vary quite a bit depending on the protocol / company / team, whatever it is.
Yeah, I completely agree. In the conversations I've had, it really depends on what entity you're trying to go after. A good example is Aave or Compound or something like that which will inherently be more decentralized in nature versus some of the things we're looking into in terms of like getting listed on CoinMarketCap or CoinGecko or some of these other data analytics platforms people might have heard of, like DeFi Pulse and things of that nature. It's mostly going to be just reaching out to their teams. And kind of joining their communities, having conversations with them, explaining about our project and what we're trying to do, and then getting listed through kind of that mechanism.
It seems like for a lot of those kinds of things, there's kind of just like basic criteria for the thing being real enough, and then they just have a procedure to add it. Is that like, do you guys think that's going to be true for like protocols as well, where it's like once there's certain market cap or certain liquidity or something, then like it satisfies the checklist and there'll kind of just be a process where people decide to add it? Or is it more that like these different communities are kind of guarding their area and you have to like persuade them that it's a good idea and it's not just about like criteria? Do you guys know?
It's from what I've seen so far, it's a combination. And I think actually Aave is a great example because we just went through this with RSR, where it's persuade people on the forum, but then they do also have a checklist.
Right.
That became evident. I know Sinatra kind of figured this out of like, do you have X amount of liquidity? Is it a contract that has like that can be shut down in any way. Like whatever the checklist is, they're starting to have a checklist. And I think it really depends on the maturity of the protocol itself. Like in the beginning, it's kind of like, what do we think will work? But now there's a variety of different protocols working with like risk management firms and things like that. Like Gauntlet is one of the risk management firms for Aave, Compound, and a few other spots, where they're actually doing very in-depth data analysis of how will this affect the overall ecosystem, and then generates its own checklist of different things and parameters that need to be hit. So it really varies depending on the thing. And then there's other, like Zapper, for instance, like total other end of the spectrum. It's write your own code and figure out how it shows up.
Yeah, I think everything Thomas said just hit the nail on the head. I completely agree. And then the one other thing I would kind of add to that is like different kind of different DeFi platforms and stuff like that have different ways to evaluate who is, I guess, going to be listed on there. And this kind of goes back to the TVL conversation that we were having before, where one of the main reasons I almost see as having TVL as a short-term kind of growth metric and success metric is not only that it benefits all the token holders and that sort of stuff and shows adoption for the protocol itself, but also it makes a lot of these conversations a lot easier, right? The folks that are going to be looking for some sort of validation before listing you and stuff like that, having high TVL and having a growing TVL absolutely makes those sorts of kind of business development conversations easier from that standpoint. So that's the only thing I'll add there.
Do you think that they care? Do you think that they care whether the TVL is organic or not? Like if you just like offer incentives and get some amount of TVL from those incentives, is that basically going to cause the same benefit as if the TVL had been organic or not?
It's an interesting question. I almost like go back to like what happened with Lido, right? It's like if the TVL gets high enough, it's impossible for anybody to even like ignore it, right?
Right.
And so no one really knows. I guess like most of it came organically in their standpoint, but it gets to a point where it's like the protocol just becomes so big that like no one can ignore it almost. And I don't know if they're going to do that much digging in terms of like, did this come organically or not? I'm sure a lot of people will do their due diligence, but also there's a lot of people who will just take it at face value for what it is. So similar to kind of the overall theme of this, I feel like it's very dependent on kind of the protocol you're looking to partner with at that point.
Yeah, I think different teams have different like levels of thoughtfulness. A few conversations we've had, people are definitely talking about like sticky TVL, right, or sticky capital, and avoiding the mercenary capital, which I think is a real thing. And there's actually good examples of other stablecoin projects that have run into this problem, where their TVL went up to into the 100 millions and like into the high 100 millions, like over $1 billion, and then are now down to like 150. And it was clearly very not sticky TVL, and so we'll have to I think if we can demonstrate stickiness, at the end of the day, what a lot of the platforms care about is capital. It's just like traditional finance. AUM is the thing that speaks, and people don't really care where that comes from because that capital is what allows them to do different things with it. The scale of the capital is more important to who owns it, as long as it doesn't go away.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
I want to make sure that we talk about the last pillar, but before we do that, one thing I want to touch on, because it's very important, and a lot of people have been talking about it, even outside of our community, and that's Soham. You mentioned the integration with integration might not be the right word, but you talked about the Curve ecosystem. And there's been some news spread around about Reserve Protocol entering the Curve wars. Even recently, I think we were one of the 10 largest holders of CVX. That's a convex token. Thomas, there's been a lot of questions about what exactly that means for the end user. So could you make it as easy as possible and talk about it from the perspective of the RToken deployer or the RToken user? What exactly does reserve participating in the curve wars mean?
Sure. Let's see. So it's actually related to the sticky capital question. In the DeFi world, there are a lot of folks, whether it's like individual yield farmers or even crypto hedge funds, that are just searching for safe yield. And one of the classic places to do that is on stablecoin dexes, where they deposit their funds into an AMM pool, allow folks to trade in between those funds. Ideally, they are not experiencing impermanent loss with those funds, and then they're generating yield in the form of trading fees and token incentives, which then they go sell for more stablecoins, and can return, and can generate a return on their capital. One of the main places to do that in the DeFi world is in the Curve DEX, which is the second largest DEX outside of Uniswap. It's got a heavy focus on stablecoins in particular. I mean, it's where a lot of stablecoins begin their trading, because there's different ways to get yield. And so when you have voting power in the Curve ecosystem, there's a set amount of Curve tokens that are emitted each week, or every 2 weeks, I believe. And voting power determines which pools those tokens go to. And so by accumulating voting power, it makes it so that we can direct some of those Curve emissions every week to RToken pools. And as a result, people will see these pools and will see that there is a high yield available on those pools, and then we'll go obtain our tokens, whether it's through minting or buying, and deposit them into those pools and leave them there. And in terms of like high level, why we went with the strategy we went with, I won't go too deep here, but there's like 18 different ways of getting involved here. And Nevin and I did a bunch of different analysis on the different ways and tried to figure out the best way for us to be able to maintain that voting power and keep it as sticky as possible with the least amount of risk for us. And so, we ended up settling on obtaining these CVX tokens. There's like a renting versus buying type thing, and this is where it becomes related to sticky TVL, where it's good to own the voting power as opposed to buy the vote or rent the voting power, because it means that you can keep the capital there longer, keep those incentives longer for folks to keep those funds deposited in the liquidity pools. Was that short and high level and clear enough, Sinatra?
Let me recap and see if I got it. So from the perspective of an RToken user, do I understand correctly that they just get a higher yield on their RToken if they deposit it on the Curve liquidity pool? And on the perspective of the RToken deployer, they get tons of liquidity initially for their RToken. Did I get that right?
I think that's exactly right. And we don't know exactly what those yield levels will be because it's dependent on how everyone else votes every week. But, like you mentioned, we are now one of the larger token holders of CVX. And so, we can probably incentivize higher yields on our pools compared to others.
That's awesome. That's something that from a community
the risk of saying the painfully obvious. It also will just make it so that RToken holders or people who want to be RToken holders can easily trade in and out of them on Curve because there will be significant liquidity.
Yes, that's a really good point. The benefit of Curve is that there's very low slippage trades for stablecoins. And so it'll make it, Curve is aggregated by 1inch and Matcha and all these other DeFi trading aggregators. And so it'll be seamless for folks to trade. And also for arbitrage market makers to help maintain the peg. Like we've spoken about this a bunch, but our tokens will be fully collateralized. But folks will have to get the collateral, deposit it, etc. And so, in the case of anything like trading off, we expect that the peg will be able to be very, very tight because there's deep liquidity for our tokens and they're fully collateralized.
Makes sense. Awesome. I notice we have 5 minutes left to the hour, and I do think we have to jump off on the hour. So I want to make sure that we dive into this last pillar in RToken growth. Soham, could you introduce us to that last BD pillar?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, for me, kind of like the most exciting thing about the whole project, right? Is just the fact that it's already set up so perfectly for this kind of last segment, which is kind of where you go after the mass adoption, the huge hockey stick growth, that sort of stuff. And then the third kind of pillar for us is really going to be retail expansion. And so, as you guys all probably know, we have the RPay app, which is currently heavily used. I think we have like 650 or more thousand users on the app itself, as well as 25,000 plus merchants that are currently using the app. And so this is really where we want to take everything that this is really going to be the time where we bridge together what's happening in kind of the protocol side and the DeFi side, and bridge it into making it accessible and usable for your everyday kind of customers through a very familiar app style front end interface almost, right? So this is where we're going to take successful RTokens and integrate them actually into the RPay app. So anybody who would be able to download the app is now able to basically take their local currency wherever they may be and swap it and get exposure for these like successful RTokens, right? You can almost imagine the same exact process that's being used right now for RSV, which is our kind of prototype stablecoin, being used in the same exact fashion for people to get access to successful RTokens, whatever those may be, and still take advantage of all the benefits there in terms of the inflation protection, the revenue sharing, that sort of stuff. We're also going to be looking to, during this kind of phase, looking to expand to more centralized finance type partnerships. So centralized exchanges getting listed on there, your Coinbases, your Binances of the world. That's where this is really going to be kind of like take foothold, as well as just I know there's a bunch of different like crypto tax softwares, and so we're looking at potential integrations with those as well in this phase. So that kind of rounds it out. Happy to dive into it with the other folks, but that gives an overview of kind of our final pillar there.
Yeah, so you're talking about the final pillar you've been talking about is actually offering those RTokens to retail users outside of DeFi, right? Also just people like the people that use the RPay app right now that are not necessarily crypto savvy. Question about that, maybe for you, Nevin. What does RTokens integrated within the RPay look like exactly? Will it just be a stable coin that might be insured? Are we thinking of bringing yield farming options through RTokens to the RPay app? Will we just integrate all RTokens, or any thoughts on that?
I think the RPay team is definitely excited about being able to offer safe yield to the existing user base and new users. So, from kind of the beginning of RPay, the idea was that eventually there would be the possibility to offer something that kind of feels like a checking account versus savings account type distinction. But it's really going to be up to the RPay team as RTokens get created and we evaluate them and see which ones are catching on and make sense and so on, and which ones get listed elsewhere. It's kind of funny because RPay sort of is its own thing, similar to how Coinbase is its own thing. And so, they'll be basically making prioritization decisions about, should we spend the time adding this new feature, or should we integrate this RToken? It's just going to be one of the possibilities on the list. So because of that, I can't say like, well, the plan is to exactly this and that and the other in such and such configuration. But I think that the basic idea is RTokens that offer value to people, that are safe, that have yield, or that have maybe less exposure to the dollar and more exposure to other things. If the RPay user base wants them, if we sense that there would be demand, and we think that we're not putting them at any significant risk by offering them, then we will.
That makes sense. I'm excited for the future to see what RTokens will be created and then integrated within RPay. I think we do have to jump off. We've reached the end of the call. I know there's a lot of people asked questions in the general chat. I'm sorry for us not answering those right now. We'll make sure, us on the community team will make sure that the next event we'll do is a Q&A so that we can answer any questions that you might have. For anyone that was here, thank you so much for joining. The session is recorded, so you can always re-listen to it afterwards. And to you, Thomas, Soham, and Nevin, also thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and glad to talk to you on a next occasion. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Alex,
for organizing. See you guys.
Take care.